Thank you, Michelle. And I did just press record, so everybody should have gotten a notification that the meeting is now being recorded. Thank you all for joining us this morning. If you had an opportunity to look over the agenda, you know that the first half of our meeting will be a presentation focused on models of affordable home ownership in Northern Virginia. So we spend a lot of time during many of these meetings talking about the need to create more affordable rental housing, which is certainly a very important and urgent need in our region. But we wanted to take a month off to focus on home ownership because home ownership is also an important priority for our region. Home ownership remains one of the primary mechanisms for wealth generation in the United States, and it's a mechanism that's becoming increasingly unattainable to many households. Access to affordable home ownership is an important equity issue. It creates opportunities for households to have housing stability and build generational wealth. So it's important to make sure that those opportunities are truly available to all. It's also, as many of you are aware, an important racial equity issue. Historic and present day discrimination in the housing sector have created a home ownership gap for households of color, particularly for Black and Hispanic households. And this gap has widened in recent months due to the disparate impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. So this morning's presentation, Mike Spots is going to be starting us off with a presentation focused on challenges to home ownership specific to the Northern Virginia region. And Mike will also be sharing the results of a new study, which we haven't yet released, but which will become available on our website later this month. It was commissioned by NoVA and conducted by a group of graduate students studying at Carnegie Mellon University's DC campus. And I did want to note that those students are on the call with us this morning. So I'd like to thank Tamar, Taylor, Katie, and Dominic for joining us. If you want to give a wave, I think Mike will be introducing them again later, but we're very grateful that they're on the call with us today. And I believe they will all be available to stay on for the Q&A after the presentation. So after hearing about the report, if you do have specific questions for the report authors, they will be available. And that report was focused on challenges and opportunities for affordable home ownership, specifically in the Bailey's Crossroads corridor, so a neighborhood level case study within our region. After we hear from Mike, we'll be hearing from Regina Pinkney with Virginia Housing, and she'll be presenting on Virginia Housing's home ownership assistance programs and their impact across the state. And then finally, we'll be hearing from John Smoot and Noemi Rivera with Habitat for Humanity of Northern Virginia. John will present a few case studies demonstrating the benefits of Habitat home ownership, and then Noemi will be sharing Habitat for Humanity Northern Virginia's experience forming a state community land trust with other Habitat affiliates. And as I mentioned before, we have allotted about 20 minutes for Q&A after the end of all the presentations. So we do ask that if you have questions for the presenters, maybe just jot them down and hold them for that Q&A period. And as Michelle already noted, we'll be recording today. And if you do want to share the presentation this morning with other members of your organizations, the recording will be available on our website by the end of this week. And I'll be sending out a link to everyone on the call this morning as well to access that recording. So we have a really full agenda. I don't want to take any more time, so I will hand things over to Mike. And Mike, you should have the option to share your screen, but let me know if you have any issues.
Thanks, Nora. Are you seeing my title slide?
Yes.
All right. Well, thanks for setting the stage there, Nora. Today, I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about sort of homeownership conditions and challenges, just to set at a high level to set the context for our presentations from Housing Virginia and Habitat for Humanity of Northern Virginia. So as we enter into this conversation, I'll be reiterating a couple of the points that Nora just mentioned. I think it's important to take a few moments to address how homeownership fits into the larger conversation about housing affordability. There are certain benefits to homeownership. If a homeowner has a stable and affordable mortgage product, they have a degree of price stability and certainty that can be financially beneficial. Unless you're in a depreciating market, the ability to build equity can be impactful, and studies show that housing equity is the largest financial asset for middle income households, for better or worse. We can talk about that on another day. But despite these benefits, I don't want to imply that homeownership is the superior model, that it's superior to renting. Homeownership is a bet that the housing market will continue to appreciate, or at least to stay stable. Some households may not have the financial stability to purchase a highly leveraged asset, and let alone take on the costs of repair and maintenance that are necessary to maintain that asset and its financial value. Others may value the flexibility that renting provides in terms of being able to move more easily for jobs, or for other circumstances that fit their life needs. But all in all, from my perspective, what we really want to achieve is a market that provides housing choices, and that includes the choice to rent or own according to the specific circumstances and preferences for that individual household. Furthermore, a dearth of homeownership opportunities has spillover effects on the rental market, which eventually translates into further housing scarcity for low-income renters. I'll touch on that in a slide in a few moments. And then finally, differential access to homeownership has equity implications, as Nora mentioned. All of us who have been involved in housing policy over the last few years are very familiar with the historical barriers to housing access and homeownership, in particular, faced by racial and ethnic minorities, and African Americans in particular. That impact is felt today, as nationwide, Black and Hispanic households are less likely to own their own home, and those that are homeowners have less housing equity on average, due in part to this legacy of discrimination and segregation. Gaps in homeownership rates, especially in rapidly appreciating markets like Northern Virginia, can become self-reinforcing moving forward, because of what the wealth created through homeownership can be passed down to the next generation. In this way, racial disparities can become more entrenched. Research shows that white households are far more likely to receive inheritance or receive help for making a down payment than Black or Hispanic households. And a lot of this is tied to past generations, the explicit policies and implicit biases over previous generations that have prevented Black and Hispanic and other minority households from becoming homeowners at the same rate as white households. So with that context, let's take a look at some of the data that demonstrates homeownership challenges in the DC metro region and Northern Virginia in particular, based on some recent publications on the issue. In the past year, I worked on the Urban Land Institute's Home Attainability Index, which compiles housing-related data for more than 100 metropolitan regions across the United States. And across the DC metro region, less than half of the owner-occupied housing stock is affordable to a family at 120% of area median income, compared to a median of approximately 60% among all regions in the data set. And though the region has smaller racial and ethnic gaps in homeownership rates, those gaps are still substantial. And conditions are trending in the wrong direction. This year's State of the Nation's Housing Report from the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies found that the DC metropolitan region's median cost to median income ratio rose from around 3 to 1 in 1990 to nearly 4.5 to 1 last year. To put these numbers into the context of the region's workforce, let's look at data from the National Housing Conference's Paycheck to Paycheck database, which compares the income needed to afford a median-priced home with 10% and 3% down. Respectively, those figures are represented by the two columns on the left as you look at the slide, with the incomes for various occupations in the region on the right. And apologies if that slide is coming through a little bit blurry. But of those occupations I sampled for this exercise, only a construction manager earns enough to afford a median-priced home without being cost-burdened. Several, such as an accountant, civil engineer, or nurse, are somewhat more likely to be able to afford to purchase if they're in a two-income household. But the gaps are larger for others, such as delivery truck drivers and bus drivers. Data from the Urban Institute shows that tightness in the ownership market is being driven in part by substantial household growth in upper income categories. And as high-end demand increases, it has impacts on the rental market as well. For those renters with the means and interest in owning, inventory is limited. This information from the Urban Institute is somewhat dated at this point, but their 2017 analysis showed that barely half of the region's ownership inventory is affordable to even the higher income renters. This The result is that private market landlords cater to those higher income tenants, which contributes to the repositioning of older rental properties and the loss of more affordable units. So we can see a direct impact of a lack of home ownership opportunities on lower income renter households. Within this regional context, it's important to note that parts of the Northern Virginia region are more costly than the region as a whole, and thus these numbers may be understating local homeownership affordability challenges. And to shed some more light on the local issues, I'd like to highlight some select findings from the research report that Nora mentioned, that was commissioned by the Northern Virginia Affordable Housing Alliance and conducted by Tamar Bailey, Dominic Fiorentino, Taylor Gauthier, and Katie Pasco, who are recent graduates from the public policy program at Carnegie Mellon University. Again, Dominic, Taylor, and Tamar, I saw on the line. If Katie is on the line as well, I'd like to welcome her as well, but welcome all of you and thank you for your research. And we asked them to look at the issue of homeownership affordability through the prism of the Route 7 corridor between Bailey's Crossroads and Seven Corners. We selected this corridor in part because of its socioeconomic diversity and pockets of existing affordable homeownership opportunities to see if more broadly applicable lessons can be drawn from that corridor. There are other research objectives, but today I'll just be focusing on those elements for today's presentation. The student team analyzed these factors and developed a series of recommendations for expanding access to homeownership. NoVA will be using this research to inform a series of policy recommendations and conversations, which will be released along with the full student report later on in the summer. And this research unearthed a lot of great data and information, which we don't have time to get into in today's presentation. So I don't want to, what I'm showing you today isn't the whole thing. So I'm really eager to provide this sneak peek, but just know that there's going to be a lot more additional information to come later this year. So I'll highlight some key contextual points, and maybe if we have time during the discussion part, we have the researchers on the call. They can potentially address some questions in the discussion portion of the agenda. So to my point earlier about differentials with Northern Virginia with the region-wide data, the metropolitan region-wide data, this slide demonstrates that home values in the corridor are less expensive than in Fairfax County as a whole, as well as the city of Alexandria and Arlington County. And I'll note that these, for city of Alexandria, Arlington County, and Fairfax, those home values tend to be higher than the Washington, D.C. metropolitan region as a whole as well. The relative affordability of the corridor is driven by the availability of condominium units, which is the dark gray bar in the chart. As you can see from this slide, there are scarce few single-family homes, which are indicated in red, or townhomes in the corridor, which is the lighter gray color, that are affordable at 100% of area median income. There are also substantial racial and ethnic disparities in homeownership attainability as well. The previous slide compared housing prices to 100% of the area median income for the overall population. This slide looks at the percentage of ownership units by housing type that are affordable to the median income household in the study area disaggregated by race and ethnicity. Again, we see that the condo stock is comparatively affordable, but the vast majority of the housing stock is still unaffordable to most Black and Hispanic households that are currently living in the corridor, which shows that even in a neighborhood that is relatively economically diverse, that it isn't segregated by income, you can still have barriers in that ladder of opportunity, that ladder of economic opportunity and mobility, that, you know, even if you have a more diverse corridor, that doesn't mean that it is open to everyone to the same extent because of that barrier to home ownership and the lack of affordability writ large. So as I mentioned, in the interest of time, I can only highlight a few key points from the study, and we're going to make additional materials available in the near future so that everyone can look and dive into it on their own time. But I'll close by highlighting the key corridor specific findings from the research team that I believe can be accurately extrapolated to the rest of the region. The first is that single family homes are the least affordable option and are becoming less so. If I can editorialize a bit here, if current market trends hold, any approach that focuses homeownership policy solely on this housing type is one that is effectively giving up on homeownership for middle income households over the long term. The second finding is that the comprehensive plan and zoning for the corridor restrict the most affordable housing types. And editorializing again, NoVA found the same pattern region-wide, not just in this corridor, as part of our Building Northern Virginia's Future report, which we released a few years ago. Third, most of today's slides focus on whether households have the income to afford monthly payments, but they also need the wealth to provide a down payment. There are policy and subsidy solutions to this challenge, which I suspect will be covered in more detail later in today's session. And then finally, if we want more equitable access to home ownership, it's important to proactively examine the disparate impacts that past and current policies have on non-white households. So the policy path moving forward is something that we'll be talking about in the following conversations, as well as in the discussion. But I will say that the homeownership policy has a lot of intersections with a lot of the other conversations that are going on right now across the corridor, including inclusionary zoning, how we spend our financial subsidy resources, but also policy debates like missing middle housing that we're seeing in Arlington, or approaches to redeveloping our corridors across the region. So I'll pause there, or I'll stop there and conclude my presentation. And I'm looking forward to the other presentations today in the discussion portion. And once again, I want to commend the Carnegie Mellon Student Group for their work on this project. Thank you.
So next up, we have Regina with Virginia Housing. And Regina, you also should have the option to share your screen. Please let me know if you're having any difficulty. Oh, looks like you're all set. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me here to do this presentation. I'm from Virginia Housing. I'm a business development officer for Northern Virginia, and I'm here to share with you some of the tools that we have available to help lenders and agents in our communities help hopefully close this housing gap. And I feel that the more people know what we can do, the more that these tools will be used. And what you'll see later is a kind of combination of products to help make housing affordable in areas that may not be so. But first, let's talk about our Northern Virginia Affordable Housing Program. We are interested not only in the fact that affordable housing helps build wealth, but we recognize that a large percentage of people of color are not attaining home ownership. And between the high demand for affordable rentals and buying opportunities, we feel like we have some tools to help close that gap. So we have some shared goals with you all at Virginia Housing, and we call our program Opportunity 2025. And that is our goal, to develop targeted outreach and lending initiatives to eliminate the disparities in access to home ownership. We want to increase wealth building opportunities with safe, affordable mortgage products. So here are some of the terms that we use, and you all may be familiar with them, but these are some of our programs. So we have our CCA at Virginia Housing. That's the Closing Cost Assistance Program. And what it is it's a grant that is forgiven at settlement. The CCA is 2% of the sales price or appraised value, whichever is lower. And the borrower can use other programs, as you'll see later in my presentation, along with the CCA. The DPA is for borrowers who, first-time home buyers specifically, who purchase using a conventional or a FHA loan that requires a down payment assistance, a down payment. And for those programs, we give 2% grant of the sales price or appraised value on a conventional loan and 2.5% on an FHA. And what that does is it requires both borrowers, regardless of loan type, to only contribute to the sales price, covering sales price, 1%. So if you do a conventional or FHA, all you need is 1% plus closing costs. And then we have our mortgage credit certificate, and I cannot stress the importance of the MCC enough. The MCC is the frosting on the cake, but it's not quite the best part, but it really brings everything together, right? The experience. And so that's what we want to see people doing. We want them to have the experience of having their cake and eating it too. How about that? So the MCC is it converts 10% of the interest that the borrower pays for their mortgage to a dollar for dollar tax credit every single year that they live in the home. Now, the other 90% of the interest, should they itemize, can be deducted the way we do currently, but they get that 10% tax credit. If they don't itemize, they can still take the 10% tax credit on top of the standard deduction every single year that they live in the home. And then our loan combo, it's again that stacking, that layer. We're gonna stack the cakes with the frosting and put everything on top and decorate it and make it one big, beautiful thing. So that's what we want consumers to start talking to lenders and agents about. We want that loan combo, right? We want it all. So, and one of the things we're very proud of is our free home buyer education. Our home buyer education course has been approved by HUD. It is extensive, and it really does set a good foundation for home buyers or potential home buyers to understand the process, their rights and their responsibilities every step of the way throughout the process. And our home buyer education certificates are good for 2 years, and the class takes between 6 and 8 hours to complete. And then Spark. Spark is, near and dear to my heart. I used to be a loan officer. Spark is a 1% interest rate reduction for free to the daily rate for Virginia housing borrowers. And it's not based on income. It's just based on where Spark is available and if the region or the nonprofit that is sponsoring Spark if the borrower fits in their guidelines. And I'll explain a little bit more about that later. So income limits. So for Virginia housing, you all probably already know, but we have maximum income limits, not minimum income limits. So as an originator, I actually helped a young lady who grossed $18,000 a year buy a home in the city of Alexandria, condo, but I use Virginia housing as a foundation for that process. So here in Northern Virginia, our maximum sales price limits are $525. And you can attach to that our grant, our DPA and CCA. You'll see for our grant limits, though, they're lower than our regular limits. So our standard limits mean that you are not getting any free money, you're just borrowing money. The lower income limit here, 110, 500, which is still very generous for a grant program, is for the CCA and DPA. And then again here for a house of 3 or more, 129. And that is gross household income. However, borrowers who are not eligible for our grant based on household income may use our standard programs and still receive 100 to 101.5% financing. And that's via a combination of a first and second trust. So there are options to overcome the hurdle of a down payment, regardless of income with us. And oh, I forgot the last point. Our minimum credit score is 620. So borrowers can get 100% financing up to $525,000 in Northern Virginia with a 620 credit score. So the other programs that we offer all of our loans are 30-year fixed. We have an FHA, VA, rural housing. We have the plus second mortgage. We have a conventional loan with 3% down and a conventional loan with no MI. And then all of our programs, all of our extras like Spark and the MCC can be added to these loans. On our website, you'll find our home loan options booklet. It's a digital version. And if you all would ever like to have some printed copies, I would be happy to provide you with them. Just let us know. You'll have my contact information at the end. And it really does break down all of our programs and in a very accessible way for consumers to understand our mission and what's available to them because of our mission. We also are participating in podcasts and marketing, and we're starting again. We used to have a home buyers club where it would be I think it was like anywhere from 6 months to 18 months. and communities would start a home buyers program where they would go through the process of educating themselves about homeownership using our program, our curriculum, so to speak. And at the end of the home buyers club, they would have a graduation, often have a little party, lots of snacks, and then prepare to move on together as a club into home ownership. That was very successful in the past, and now we are in the process of renewing that home buyer club. So please look forward to that in the future from Virginia Housing. Now, one of the things I loved about Virginia Housing as an originator in Northern Virginia was that I could use it with other programs. So I want to mention here a couple of state programs that can be truly powerful in combination with Virginia Housing. And that's the VITA program. Some people say VITA, I say VITA, but it's the Virginia Individual Development Account. And what it does is it matches, it's a savings program that matches 8-to-1 the savers account. Now, this is for folks 80% at or below 80% AMI. But if your client saves $500, the state will match their $500 with $4,000. They have between 6 months and 24 months to max out and use the funds. VITA will also allow 2 adults in each household to have an account. So you can see for a household of 3 with 2 working adults, maybe making $25,000 each, not a lot of room to save in Northern Virginia, but if they can manage to save $1,000, they can meet the lender at the closing table with $9,000. And then the state down payment assistance program. That is also through DHCD, and the funds are limited, but they would allow up to a 10% down payment, and it would be a grant that is forgiven over time as well. So you can imagine if you had a Virginia Housing loan, you had the VITA account for your cash needed to close, and then you use the state DPA along with the Virginia Housing DPA. Now things start to move. So let's look at a home in Arlington, and this is based on a real property in Arlington, Virginia. Sales price $390, taxes $34.92, condo fee $356, and we're going to give this consumer a housing debt to income ratio of 33% with a 690 credit score. All of these things matter in affordability. For example, the 690 credit score. With a lower credit score, consumers are going to have a much higher rate, except for with Virginia Housing, because we don't practice risk-based pricing. So the person with the 800 credit score gets the same rate on an FHA loan as the person with a 620 credit score, but that's unusual. So we see here for this home with a 33 debt to income ratio, the gross income needed for this condo in Arlington would be $95,858. That would be the minimum they could earn with a 33% front ratio. You see the interest rate is 3.375, and we have principal and interest of $1,672.45 a month. So here we have on the left the same scenario we just looked at, but now let's look at a different approach to this property. It is in Arlington. So what I've done is, you'll see here in green, I've added Arlington's DPA, MIPAP, M-I-P-A-P. MIPAP is up to 25% of the sales price of the home. That sits as a silent second behind the first, with no interest and no payments required and no interest accrued. So we went from $23,516 needed at settlement to $2,002.21 at the same house. But even better, the income we need to afford this condo with MIPAP is $66,945. That's huge. But part of that solution is not just MyPap, but see this spark rate? We've taken the rate from 3.375 down to 2.375 for 30 years fixed with no additional fees to the borrower. That's the spark. Oh, forgive me, I'm a little quick on the trigger there, but let's go back here and look at, okay. Now let's look at the PITI. Let's look at where the rubber meets the road. PITI is principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. And so what we're looking at here is with our original scenario, the monthly payment is going to be $2,662.74. We've taken it down to $1,859.61. If every lender in Northern Virginia knew how to do this, what would happen to our housing gap? I say it would go down quite a bit. So I want to show you one last example of a much more affordable price for folks who have even lower incomes. If we find a condo for $235 with a $613 condo fee, when we apply the MyPap second, when we apply Spark to the rate, we get that payment down to $1,519 a month by taking all of these products and combining them. My name, as I said, was Regina Pinkney, and that's the end of my presentation. And thank you for having me here to share my passion with you.
Thank you so much, Regina. So I will just pull up our last set of slides. And I'll hand it over to John and Noemi.
Thanks, Nora. First, a big thank you to Virginia Housing, who has been a terrific partner with Habitat for Humanity in Virginia for decades. They service all of our loans for free. So that's just a terrific benefit and a great shout out to Virginia Housing. Well, these are kind of like a well, duh moment about the benefits of affordable home ownership. We all know them. Most of us are homeowners, so I wanted to kind of talk a bit against the background of these obvious benefits of some of the issues, particularly around racial and economic inequality. So obviously the first statement is true, but it's also unequal in both its access and subsidization. One culprit is the mortgage interest deduction. The MID provides $25 billion per year in tax savings to affluent and mostly white homeowners. And this contributes even further to economic and racial inequality. That's according to the National Low Income Housing Coalition. 90% of MID's benefits go to largely white households with incomes over $100,000, and 63% of the benefits go to those with annual incomes over $200,000, the vast majority of which, again, being white households. So this 108-year-old tax code has got to be amended, whatever, as it fails to even incentivize home ownership. It's just a big fat cherry on the top, creating further wealth gap. Home ownership is really affordable housing. The typical homeowner nationally spends 10% point less of their income than the typical renter. And those are market rents, of course. As an Urban Institute paper notes, by writing policy that prioritizes Americans' access to home ownership, lawmakers could address both the affordable home shortage and the racial wealth gap. That same paper also notes that there's this pernicious belief that home ownership is reserved for people who have achieved some level of financial success, almost like it's a reward. And it's not a path for people to, I mean, it's not for people on the path to financial security. And so that's maybe the paper suggests that the federal, state, and local efforts to create more affordable rental as a way out of the problem. And affordable rental is a very powerful tool to address poverty housing, but homeownership deserves concerted policy work to get people into homes that they can buy and build wealth. And the trick, of course, is supply. And what's worse, as Mike noted, rents increase when homeownership falls, increasing economic and racial gaps. Nora, the next slide, please. You know, it's getting people into homeownership as the fundamental problem. And as the Carnegie Mellon paper notes, structural racism and segregation have limited access to homeownership for non-white households for a very long time. 87% of residential parcels only allow for the construction of single-family homes, and the vast majority of single-family homes are out of reach for low and moderate income households. 92% of our families that we have served are families of color. We are doing what little bit that we can in Northern Virginia to deal with tremendous long-standing disparities in racial wealth equity. And then just some stats. In 2020, only 44% of Black households own their home, compared with 73% of white households. And the Black ownership rate is basically unchanged from the 1968 Fair Housing Act. And Hispanic homeowners have 40 times the wealth of Hispanic renters. Next slide, please. Again, some of the regular known benefits of affordable home ownership. You build equity, often less than monthly rental. Loan payments remain constant for the duration of the loan, so there's that stability for the family, for the owner, and homeowners are in control of how and when to improve property. It offers stability. The home gets more affordable over time, and it's certainly an asset that can be inherited or the wealth for generations to be passed on. Next slide. Well, here's a little bit about us. We have helped about 200 families through new home construction, renovation, or critical home repair. 92% of our homeowners are families of color. We've had 0 foreclosures in our 30 years. Habitat NoVA homeowners, and this is a conservative estimate, have amassed about 12 million in equity. They have also saved over 14 million in interest payments. 80% of our homeowners surveyed indicated their lives were better after purchasing their home, as well as 70% that it was easier to save than before purchasing their home. And that's one of our newest constructions in Southeast Fairfax County. Next slide, please. And you can see here in the parental wealth brackets in Black versus white, where the parental wealth differential, as you slide to the right, gets increasingly disproportionately, the parental wealth is toward the white households. Urban Institute found that a young adult's chance of home ownership increased by 8% when their parents were homeowners. Next slide, please. I will end my part with some 3 stories of the benefits that our program has brought about. The first is a family in the city of Falls Church, a family of 6 in a 2-bedroom apartment in Fairfax County. Beyond the overcrowding issue, the apartment was infested with mold and mildew from constant water damage and landlord neglect of the property. And the 4 young girls were chronically having to go to the emergency room with asthma and respiratory issues. And both parents are service workers, so they had to take time off from work all the time to take care of the needs of their children. Another interesting facet of this story is that they're a Muslim family, a devout Muslim family, which shuns borrowing or lending of interest. So even if they were able to afford a conventional mortgage, they are precluded because of their belief system about interest payments. So their credit score was excellent. We acquired a burned down home in Falls Church and completely redid it with hardwood flooring and an excellent HVAC install and Earthcraft Gold standards. And the girls' health immediately began to improve. And now they have amassed a great deal of equity in their new home. Next slide. In the city of Alexandria, there was a woman who lived with her partner and her 2 daughters in a Habitat home purchased in 1999. Her first trust, which is the actual cost of construction, was $79,000, and that became her principal payments. We have a soft, or what we call a silent second, which is the difference between the appreciation value of the home and the total cost of development of the home. And that was $130,000. And that second or silent trust is forgivable at the end of the 30 years with the satisfaction of a mortgage. Unfortunately, the relationship became so abusive that she had to leave the state with her children in 2013 to get safely away. And Habitat deeds specify the first right of repurchase. So she contacted us, and after the satisfaction of her principal payments and the forgiveness of, or I should say, the payment of the second loan, we were able to buy her house for $40,000. And she was able to move to New England and start a new life. This would not have been the case if she had been in a rental situation. Next slide. This family is one of our earliest families. They raised their 4 sons in the house and spent the family vacations, interestingly enough, volunteering at Habitat construction sites throughout the Mid-Atlantic area. And last year, they paid off their mortgage, and with the equity in their home, they are building a retirement home in Americus, Georgia, the birthplace of Habitat International. And what they plan to do is to keep going around to Habitat work sites to volunteer as a way of saying thank you for the opportunity they received. And he showed up toward the end of last year with a check in the hand of $10,000 and said, look, you guys gave me such a shot at this kind of opportunity. I want to give you this $10,000 check as a way to pay it forward for another family's future. They were just so grateful. And I just think that's a fun story to end with. And we'll go over to Noemi now.
Hi, everyone. So thank you to NoVA for letting us talk about homeownership, which is, as Regina, a passion of mine. So as we all know, nothing new to this crowd, we don't have enough affordable homes, and especially homes to meet the needs of low and moderate income first-time home buyers. Freddie Mac estimates there's a shortage of 3.8 million housing units on the market, a gap that pushes home prices up, making first-time home ownership even more inaccessible to low to moderate income families. Shared equity, which is what the Habitat program is one way to address the inventory shortage of affordable for-sale housing stock. Now, there's no silver bullet to increasing affordable housing stock. There needs to be many solutions to address the lack of inventory. But the shared equity and community land trust model is a proven way to make homes affordable long-term. Community land trusts and the prototype of Habitat for Humanity both have origins in the civil rights movement of the 1960s. The CLT originated as a way for sharecroppers to have economic control over the land they were working. And the Habitat prototype was a way for families that faced many barriers to be able to purchase a home. The two models have always been a means to provide wealth building opportunities. Next slide, please. So Habitat for Humanity Homeownership Program and the Community Land Trust are both shared equity programs. The Habitat program is an income-based, deed-restricted program. The income-eligible family buys the home and the land below market rate and agrees to the program restrictions for the life of the mortgage. The Community Land Trust is an income-based resale restricted program and a dual ownership model. The CLT retains the ownership of the land and leases the land to the income eligible family with a 99-year ground lease and sells the home, just the improvements, below market rate. By removing the cost of the land in the sale price, the Community Land Trust can reach families at a lower income level and keep the home affordable long-term. So about 2 years ago, Habitat NoVA began having conversations with Habitat Virginia, which is our state support organization. And we were debating the idea of creating a community land trust as a way of building homes with a longer period of affordability. Now, around the same time, other affiliates were having similar conversations with Habitat Virginia. So it didn't take us long to realize their strength in numbers. So instead of creating several community land trusts around the state, Habitat for Humanity affiliates in Virginia banded together and created the Virginia Statewide Community Land Trust. The Virginia Statewide Community Land Trust was created not to replace our Habitat program, but as another tool to create homeownership opportunities and as a way to use scarce resources, both money and land, to help generations of first-time homebuyers while still creating economic mobility. So although it's a new tool for Virginia affiliates, many other Habitat affiliates around the US use the Community Land Trust model to ensure homes retain affordability for the long term. So developing homes via the Habitat model and incorporating a ground lease is an efficient solution or an effective solution to the challenge of ever increasing building costs and shrinking subsidies. Next slide, please. So in a typical homeownership program, there's a direct assistance to a lower income homebuyer, usually through a grant, no interest loan or a deferred investment loan, in order to reduce the monthly mortgage payment to the point where the buyer can afford to purchase a market rate home. The Community Land Trust model is built around a different approach. It uses the same subsidy to reduce the purchase price of the home to an affordable level. Over the long term, the effect of the two approaches differ dramatically. The traditional subsidy temporarily creates affordable payments, while the CLT model creates permanently affordable housing. In real estate markets where housing prices rise faster than household income, the level of traditional subsidy that each successive homebuyer needs to afford market rate housing increases steadily. Even if homeowners are required to repay most or the entire subsidy when they sell, an additional subsidy is necessary to fill the affordability gap that continues to widen during the time they occupy the home. So the next generation of lower income buyers is likely to need larger subsidies than those required to lift the first household into homeownership. The CLT strategy, in contrast, is to invest in creating a stock of permanently affordable owner-occupied housing. The CLT uses a subsidy for the land costs. As a result, it could sell homes at prices that lower income families can afford without a second loan. If the homeowner decides to move, they sell the home, the subsidized home, for a formula-driven price that another lower income family can afford. By maintaining ownership of the land across multiple sales of the home, the CLT can keep homes affordable for many years without the need of additional subsidies. The CLT homeowner is still receiving all the benefits of homeownership, steady mortgage payments, paying down their principal, building equity. But up front, they agree that in exchange for the benefit of buying their home at a lower price, they're willing to forego some of the appreciation when they sell the home. The resale restrictions ensure that when the home is resold, it is still affordable to another family of similar means. So this slide compares the performance of the two types of subsidies. On the top is the one-time CLT subsidy with resale restrictions that allow the home price to increase at the same rate as the area median income. On the bottom is a no interest second soft loan where funds are to be repaid or recaptured at resale. So both scenarios use a homeowner's loan at a 3.5% interest rate. The home is assumed to have a value of $400,000 in a market where a family in the target income range can afford to pay only $300,000. Bridging the affordability gap at the time of the initial purchase requires a $100,000 subsidy, regardless of the option selected. When the first owner sells, the two approaches differ in how well they preserve the value of the subsidy and how large a return the seller realizes on the investment. There are two good reasons for limiting the amount of equity a homeowner may remove from a subsidized property at resale. In the case of the soft second, preserving the continued affordability of this one home throughout 5 resales would require a subsidy over $2 million across the span of 30 years. In comparison, the CLT home can serve the same number of families for a one-time investment of $100,000, which means that subsidizing a CLT home does not only create one home for one family or a home that is affordable for the life of the mortgage, usually 20 or 30 years, rather it's creating an affordable home that lasts long-term, serving generations of homeowners. And so that means that when a CLT gets more subsidy to make another home affordable, we're not just replacing a home with an expiring period of affordability. We're actually building a larger stock of affordable homes, helping to put a dent on the lack of inventory. Next slide, please. So CLTs have been around for many years. It's not a new invention of ours. There are over 200 community land trusts operating in the US alone. And they operate in all types of real estate markets, rural, suburban, and urban areas. And many affiliates in the US have partnered with community land trusts to create the permanent affordability. So the Virginia Statewide Community Land Trust is the newest one, so you won't find it on this chart. Although it is created by Habitat affiliates, it welcomes other affordable housing developers to include homes into the CLT. So because the Virginia statewide CLT operates throughout the Commonwealth, there's a menu of resale options for the various real estate markets. And I invite you all to take a look at our website, bsclt.org. And that concludes my presentation.